Sorry about being a little late. I'm pulling double duties. My son, that's the expert in that sound room, is off on a trip, and I had specific instructions of how to do it, but I was going to pass those on along to Andrea for the last two steps, and then all of a sudden it said time out, so I had to go back and do things over again. But for those of you that know Brother Jackie Bozeman, he had passed away. His funeral is going to be tomorrow. Visitation at 1, funeral at 2, and that will be Leak Memorial. And then later, Brother Clunch will talk to us a little bit about taking food to him and how many's going to be there and the food prep that needs to be done. So need to keep all of those that have lost loved ones, everybody that's on the sick, injured list in our thoughts and prayers. Brother Terry, as they keep juggling with his medicines, trying to get him heading in the right direction. Sister Janice coming up with the surgery as soon as they put the numbers together and figure out what they're going to do, get everything scheduled. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Okay. A neuropsychologist. Okay. Okay. So we need to keep her in our prayers. Anyone else that we need to think about before we get into our lesson? Ladies had a ladies' breakfast yesterday morning. I'm thankful for all the guys that showed up to help. We got started almost on time, but I think they had a good meal and a good time. There's nothing else. Brother Joel, would you lead us in a prayer, please? We are going to be in chapter 33 of Genesis, starting in chapter 33. And just to sort of give us a running start, Jacob has worked for his father-in-law for 2 brides and his cattle. Then he had a split with Laban, and he was going back to his home territory. and Brother Clarence covered up through 32, chapter 32 Wednesday night, where the Laban had already come back and are caught up with him, and told him he'd stole idols and stuff like that, and they had made peace and gone their separate ways. And now we're on the journey some more. We're just about to where Jacob is headed. But I think it's very important at this part for us to understand a little bit about age or some timing. Now, because it has been so long ago, we don't know some exacts. So when we talk time, we're just sort of putting it in a relative space here. We're not saying that Jacob was 37 and a half years old minus 2 days or anything like that. We're not trying to get that specific. But with him being this close to where he's going to be, he's about to meet Esau. When Jacob went down to Laban to get a wife, how long did he have to work to get his first wife, Leah? 7 years. That's not really the one he wanted, but he worked 7 years for that one. He almost immediately got his second wife, the one he wanted, but it was an IOU. I'll give her to you, but you have to work how many years for her? Another 7 years. So 7 and 7 is 14. Then how long did he have to work for the cattle? 6 years, wasn't it? So 7, 7, and 6, we're at the 20-year mark. So he has been away from Esau a minimum of 20 years. Now, we don't know how long this journey takes. It's a long journey, but you have to remember that there's young cattle involved, young kids involved. And as we go through and talk then about some of his sons, his family members, we can look at this to get a good idea of age. And I need you to do that, particularly when we get to the next chapter and start looking at Dinah and her age. So as we start looking at it here, Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau came. Now, before we get to this spot, what had Jacob done on their journey as they was getting close to this land where he was going to, knew he was going to meet up with Esau? What had he done to try to smooth things out and grease the path, so to speak? Sent gifts. He had a bunch of cattle that was going ahead with some people, and it was sort of like a peace offering. Culture back in those days, when they went to meet somebody, they needed to give gifts. And here's the little tricky part, and I think we need to know that when we see Jacob and Esau talking. If we take it up to today's time, and I went over to Brother Claunch's house, and I took him a gift, and I said, here is whatever, and he refused the gift, what did he just do? He refused my friendship. But when he takes the gift, it is automatically a friendship. That was the culture in those days. Today, people are a little bit sneakier, and they'll take the gift and still whop you upside the head. But anyway, back in those days, once the gift was accepted, and it was always to be from the higher position person. In other words, if Esau had told one of his servants to accept the gift, it wouldn't count. It had to be from Esau, one of the higher delegates, to make that peace bond. So he had done that. But then as he's coming up to him, Esau had 400 men with him. Now you have to go all the way back and remember when Jacob left, what was Esau's frame of mind when Jacob left family to go to Laban? He wanted to kill him because he had literally stolen something from him, his birthright. Because Isaac had blessed Jacob with all of that when it should have been Esau. So, and Esau wasn't going to do it while his father was alive. He made that statement, but he fully intended to kill Esau. I mean, Esau fully intended to kill Jacob. Now, so when Jacob is getting close to that territory and he sees Esau, Esau has already passed by that whole herd of gift offerings that he was going to send out as peace offering. But there Esau stands with 400 people. What do you think is going through Jacob's mind? Because they had had no contact in minimum 20 years. Uh-oh. So, as we read on, he had divided the children unto Leah and unto Rachel and to the two handmaidens. And he had put the handmaids and their children foremost, and Leah and her children after, and Rachel and Joseph hindermost, meaning the father's behind. So as they're getting close to that territory, he divides up the group and he puts the handmaids and their children, which were still his wives, but we had discussed the difference between the free and the bondwoman as far as the hierarchy in marriages. So he put the handmaids and their children first. Then he put Leah and hers, and then Rachel and with Joseph in the very back. Why would he do it in that order? He wanted to protect the most valuable, right? Now, you can read a lot of different literatures on how he wanted to start with the least important and go to the most important and do when he met Esau. But remember, he didn't know Esau was going to greet him kindly. So, at least in my estimation, and if anybody's got a different opinion, please speak up. But in my opinion, anyway, as you read through it, it was because he wanted to put the most valuable in the safest place. That is what makes common sense to me. So as they're marching along here, and in verse 3, he passed over before them, meaning that he was sort of in that group and he saw him, but they was, like I said, he was mixed in with them. He passed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near his brother. In other words, he would bow and move a little bit and bow and move a little and bow. And he did this 7. Why the number 7? Again, logic and common sense. Complete. He was complete submission to Esau. Honor and submission, because he calls him later on Lord. Why would he use the term Lord if he wasn't? Now, you also have to pause for just, I'm glad you mentioned that, because you got to pause just a minute and think about Esau's frame of mind. We've had no contact with Esau during this period of time. So what do you think his frame of mind could be? Like I said, we've had no contact, but if we use some just basic logic, for 20 years, he hadn't had to put up with that little runt that he was mad at. He had everything that he had desired. As we go along, he has built up a large amount of property. He has lived in relative peace and calm all this time. So if you put that together as he's bowing, the next verse, I think, is the tell-all verse. Esau ran to meet him, not charging him. What's the difference between run and charge? If you charge somebody, you're in an aggressive mode. If you're just running, you're hastily trying to get there to meet him. Embraced him, fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Where was Esau's hatred? Where was his anger? Gone. Brother Clunch. Yes, sir. Brother Clancy referenced over in Hebrews, and basically have peace with all men is where that one's going. And again, a custom back, and it's still to a degree that these days, if you ever watch news on TV or something, when people in the East meet, what do? Whether they're friends or not, what do? Kiss each other on the cheek. So that was just a form of greeting. But here, Esau, when he ran, embraced him and kissed him, and then they wept. That, if you put all of those together, that means that Esau was truly glad to see him, and that all that anger and resentment that he had against Jacob had dissipated. He lifted up his eyes and saw the women and the children, and said, Who are those with thee? And he said, The children which God hath graciously given thy servant. See, again, this is where we were going based on that question you asked. God has blessed me with all this. So Jacob is putting, again, God at the forefront of everything here. Then the handmaids came near, they and their children, and they bowed themselves. And Leah also with her children came near and bowed themselves. And after came Joseph near and Rachel, and they bowed themselves. And he said, What meanest thou by all this drove which I met? All right, we're going to pause right there. The drove is the cattle that was going as the peace offering. Do you not think that he had stopped them and asked at least, What are you doing in my territory? Why are you here? What does all this mean? Would they have not told him what was going on? We're going to find out later they did. But again, just to keep things sort of in a timeline, he knew what was going on before he asked that question, because he had already talked to the, our Western term would be the drovers, the herdsman that was taking care of it. Right. As Brother Client said, the insult is sort of turned around, because now Jacob is trying to give Esau something that Esau doesn't need. We'll find out he has plenty. But again, we go back to the custom. They need to accept it. But here, Esau said, let's back up one, where he said, What meanest thou? And he said, These are to find grace in the sight of my Lord. Remember what we said? Give a gift, receive it, grace, friendship. But then Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Keep thou hast unto thyself. He didn't need it. He didn't know that Jacob didn't need it either. Jacob had plenty at this time. But in a way of friendship, he was saying, I don't need it, that's okay. A fellow that I used to fish with a lot, we were really good friends in addition to just loving to fish together. And when we would go out on a trip, we would alternate taking his boat, my boat, and all that. And if we stopped to eat somewhere, one of us would just pick up the ticket. And at the initial outset, it was like, no, I will, no, I will, no, I will. But then after a while, we didn't do that anymore. Whoever hand got there first, and it worked out to be a pretty even balance. But here he's trying to be gracious and say, I really don't need it. You keep it. Again, if he had still been in his stage of, I hate you, what would he have done? He would not only have taken that, but what would he have done? Taken everything else, because he had the manpower to do it with. But here, as they're going through this, Jacob said, Nay, I pray thee, if now I have found grace in thy sight, then receive my present at my hand, For therefore I have seen thy face as though I had seen the face of God, and thou wast pleased with me. That all rounds it out right there. He needed to take it to prove that that Jacob was now in the good graces of Esau versus still contentious. And he said, let us take our, where did we get to? And then take, I pray thee, my blessing that is brought to thee, because God hath dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. And he urged him, and he took it. Once he took it, deal done, everybody's happy. However, what do you think is going on in the back of Jacob's mind? Because as we look at some of this a little bit farther, we're going to find out, or at least in my opinion, I don't think, even though it should be settled on a formal level, I don't think Jacob is quite at ease with what's going on. And that's personal. We can talk about that as we go. But then he said, and this is Esau, he said, let us take our journey and let us go, and I will go before thee. And he said unto him, my Lord knoweth that the children are tender, and the flocks and the herds with young are with me. And if men should overdrive them one day, all the flocks will die. Jacob is not quite at ease with letting Esau take the lead. He's afraid that he's going to drive the cattle too hard and that the cattle are going to die, and also the young children are involved. Verse 14, let my Lord, I pray thee, pass over before his servant, and I will lead on softly, according as the cattle that goeth before me, and the children be able to endure until I come unto my Lord unto Seir. Well, you go ahead, and we're going to travel at our pace. I'm going to take care of all this, and then we'll meet you over there, which is a completely logical thing to do. But then look what Esau says. Esau said, let me now leave with thee some of the folks that are with me. And he said, what needeth it? Let me find grace in the sight of my Lord. See, at this point, I personally think that Jacob is still a little uneasy. Now, why are you going to leave people with me? I've made the trip this far without any problem. I'm in your territory now that is supposedly sound and safe. Why you want to leave people here with me? You think maybe in the back of his mind he was thinking, well, if you leave people here, they're going to do me harm. Do you think he had really resolved himself to the fact that Esau had been totally forthright and upfront with his dealings? Sounds a little paranoid. Well, just maybe a little weak on trust still. Yes, ma'am. Right? Because a lot of people, when they do this, they fume and the anger gets more. But here, you also have to remember what I'd said, or what we had gone through at the outset. When Jacob first left, what did Esau do? He had overheard mom and dad talking about not liking Canaanite women, not wanting Jacob to marry a Canaanite, wanting him to marry some kin, and that's the reason they sent him off. And what did Esau do? Married Ishmael's daughter, one of his daughters, which would make that he had married a cousin on the father's side. And what had they sent Jacob to do? Marry a cousin on the mother's side. So it appeared even from the very outset that when he overheard it, he didn't go marry one of Ishmael's daughter out of resentment, because at that point the Ishmaelites hadn't gone as far wrong as they had gone. So, okay, my brother's going to marry a cousin on mom's side, I'll marry a cousin on dad's side. It looked like he was trying to do something that would gain parents' favor instead of aggravation. So it looks to me, at least, like Esau was a pretty good guy from the get-go, but he had had several things happen to him along the way that made him mad at his brother. I never had a brother or a sister. I cannot speak from experience. But how many of you in here did have two kids, one male and female? They didn't get along all the time. What? So those of you in here that had brothers or sisters, you can speak and say if y'all had total harmony at all times. Brother Joel? Well, yeah, but when he married the Ishmaelite, they didn't have the bad reputation they had later. So I can see where you get that idea, but I'm not so sure I would agree, because the rest of the folks had no need to. Yeah, it wasn't anything personal with them. And mhm. Okay. Let's see if we can get any more information as we go through here on that. Yes, sir. Yeah. It comes down to, as Brother Clunch was saying there, it sort of comes down to a perception issue. Jacob knows that when he left, Esau had told him had threatened to kill him, and he sees 400 men. Even though they were not soldiers per se, I would venture to say every one of them had a weapon. Yeah. Yeah. But Esau was probably just on his normal travel with servants, and Esau had no ill intent. But you see all this. I guess I'm going to use one of my cousins as an example here, a situation that he ran into when he was a cop. This was years ago, before things got to the level things are today, about cop issues and people hating cops. This happened back in the 70s, 1970s, when people were still friendly with cops. But he got a call, and they was out chasing a burglar, and he had spotted him at one time. He was on foot, and so he goes and he opens the door and goes into a warehouse. Well, all of a sudden, 6 men jump up that had been shooting craps, gambling illegally, and they all reach for weapons. My cousin's already got his drawn. What could have happened in that situation? He looked at him and said, I'm not here for you. I'm chasing a burglar. You don't want to die, and I don't want to shoot you. Everybody put their weapons away, and he went on chasing the bad guy. But again, it's all perception. When he first went in, how much danger was he in his own, well, not even in his own mind. It could have been the real thing. But the way he handled it, it de-escalated real quickly. But when you walk into a situation, you immediately come up with an idea of what's going on. What was in the mind of those guys that were gambling illegally? Cop. What would have happened today? Been a lot of shooting. But I hope that sort of puts things in perspective. I think we got down to about verse 15. So Esau returned that day on his way into Seir. Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built him an house and made booths for his cattle, and therefore the name of the place is called Succoth. Booths just means temporary shelters like stalls, and throw some covering over it for the animals. And he built him a house, a permanent place. And he bought a parcel of a field where he had spread his tent at the hand of the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. And he erected there an altar and called it El Israel. So the first thing that Jacob does when he gets there is buys property, sets up an altar. Does that give you an indication of his mindset? Because what had he told Esau when he met him, and Esau inquired of the kids? God blessed me. So any question? Well, let's see. There's one other thing. People want to get into a big discussion on the 100 pieces of money, whether or not it was literally money or livestock. Doesn't matter. It's valuable. So he gave him 100 pieces of value for it. They made a bargain, and he now had even though he could have been told just to live there, he had to buy it. He had to have something invested in it. Remember back with Abraham? Abraham could have been given a place to bury his wife, but he insisted on what? A purchase, an investment. He had to have something invested in it. Questions in on chapter 33? Anything I missed? Or yes, ma'am? You know too much about what's happening next. No, we're going to get in that what was the instruction for those what would turn out to be those that were chosen to be God's people, the Israelites? What instructions were they given as far as, we'll talk about it now since you brought it up, what were their instructions in dealing with other people? They were not to mingle with them, but why were they not to mingle with them? It all had to do with religious involvement. It was the idolatry part. It wasn't that they were maybe a good person, but it was because they didn't want the influence of idolatry. And Sister Lisa had just brought that up. She knows where we're about to get into in chapter 34. So he does this a little bit away from the city so there won't be the mingling. And this is what's really going to be the thorn in all their sides when it comes to Dinah. But anything else on chapter 33? Okay. 34 then says, and Dinah, the daughter of Leah, which she bare unto Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. Number one mistake. weren't to mingle, but now she's going out to see the daughters of the land. How old is Leah? How old is Dinah at this point? Probably 12 or 13, because she's allowed to be out on her own this way. And as we're sort of jumping ahead, but we find out that Shechem wants to marry her, and the technical legal marrying age of a girl back in those days was 12 years plus 1 day. So they had to be at a minimum of 12 years old before he would even inquire about marrying her. I'm sorry? Where was the parental guidance? We don't want to go down that road, do we? Okay. So she was probably 12 or 13, a young teenager, just right at that area. If that be true, then her older brothers by Leah would have been somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 or 7 years older than she, maybe 19, 20, getting into that range difference, because Dinah is on down in the pecking order versus the other children. When Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her, he took her, lay with her, and defiled her. Isn't that what they was afraid of to start with? Why they were instructed not to have any dealings with? And his soul clave unto Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the damsel, and spake kindly unto the damsel. Got a question for you. Dinah, well, if you can, think of culture then versus culture now, because there's a big difference. I guess I better explain that difference to you right now. The parents back in those days basically had the say-so of who married whom. Okay? Today, it's all on the two people, except in certain cultures. Certain cultures today still want to put the parent in charge of the betrothals. Also, you have to remember that in that time setting, if someone had been captured in battle, say they'd had a big conflict and there had been a war, and the men took women from that city and married them, the women were obligated to stay with that whoever took them and whoever married them. Whereas today, they're going to try, at least most, to get away and get back. But here, as we go through, we'll also find out that Dinah is staying in the house of Shechem. So why would she stay? So my question basically was, when he took her and lay with her and defiled her, was she a consenting party or a non-consenting party? Because she stayed with him afterwards. Just food for thought. Think about that. Right. Main point is she was defiled. It doesn't matter if she was willing or unwilling. By having the relationship, she was defiled. But he loved her. And in verse 4, Shechem spake unto his father Hamor, saying, Get me this damsel to wife. Now, in our culture today, if this had happened, wouldn't it have been the honorable thing to do to marry the girl? Now, back in that day, was it the honorable thing to do? Sometimes, but you have to look at they are of different religious backgrounds, and any contact with them in that manner is not good. Verse 5, Jacob heard that he being Shechem, had defiled Dinah his daughter. Now his sons were with the cattle in the field, and Jacob held his peace until they were come. And Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out unto Jacob to commune with him. And the sons of Jacob came out of the field when they heard it. And the men were grieved, and they were very wroth, because he had wrought folly in Israel in lying with Jacob's daughter, which thing ought not to be done. And Hamor communed with them, saying, The soul of my son Shechem longeth for your daughter. I pray you give her him to wife. Now, when he made that comment, it wasn't that he wanted to just her to be given, because you got to remember again, back in those days, the men paid the dowry for the woman. So as the same way Jacob had worked for his two wives, paid for them, here when he says give, this means consent to us making this arrangement. And make ye marriages with us, and give your daughters unto us, and take our daughters unto you, and ye shall dwell with us, and the land shall be before you. Dwell and trade ye therein, and get you possessions therein. And Shechem said unto her father and unto her brethren, Let me find grace in your eyes, and what ye shall say unto me, I will give. Again, he's willing to pay whatever they want now to make peace. What had Jacob just done with Esau? Given something of value to make peace. Now Shechem is trying to give something of value to make peace, and also pay the dowry for it. Ask me never so much dowry and gift, and I will give according as ye shall say unto me, but give me the damsel to wife. He must really love her. He's willing to do anything to make peace and get her. Yes, sir. Well, it could be that he was young and dumb and lust, but he was willing to do anything. And Brother Clint just said sort of the tables are turned, because hadn't Jacob and Laban had a similar discussion? What's the wages going to be? And the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor his father deceitfully, and said, because he had defiled Dinah their sister. And they said unto them, We cannot do this thing, to give our sister to one that is uncircumcised, for that were a reproach to us. But in this will we consent unto you, if you will be as we be, that every male of you be circumcised. Luke has gone out to count, and I don't think we're going to get much farther than that, but here's what I want to point out. Jacob gave Esau. Esau received friendship. Shechem wants to give. The sons make an agreement. If you'll do this, we will accept it. But they lied. They were it says they were deceitful. But they were flat out wrong, because the culture of the day was, if you accept, the bond is there. By making that statement that we will do it if you agree to this, they were making a bond that we will do it, but then they didn't. Brother Clients can pick up here Wednesday night. Thank you all so much for your comments. Hey, how you doing? You doing okay? Hey, how you doing? Oh, thank you. I'm heading that way now to readjust it to the worship hour.
Jay's not here. He got counted.
I'm sorry?
I said, Jay's not here. He got counted.